Can you be successful and not aligned? Yes. There are lots of people who are.
Wouldn't you argue, or at least I'm going to argue in this case, that like you have to be aligned to be good at your job?
We don't have a superhuman who's perfect at everything. This doesn't exist.
If you could install one thing in every founder's brain right now and be like, okay, I'm going to install this in your brain to level you up, to make you a better entrepreneur, what would that one thing be? Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. Most founders eventually hit a wall that isn't strategy, isn't product, isn't market. It's the way you think under pressure. Today's guest is the person the sharpest founders call when that wall shows up. Dr. Yishai is a PhD level licensed psychologist and an executive coach to entrepreneurs and founders. And he is the host of the Think Mastery with Dr. Yishai podcast, where he translates rigorous applied psychology into practical tools for leaders. He runs his own practice as well and licensed in New York and New Jersey. He supervises and trains other therapists. He speaks nationally on adaptability in the human brain. And his tagline says everything you need to know about how he works. Clear decisions, fast moves, which I love. Dr. Yishai blends psychology and high-performance coaching for real-world leverage. Today's conversation isn't a therapy session, although God knows I probably need it. But it's a real conversation between two people who care about the same thing, helping founders think more clearly, act more courage, and build companies that don't crush the humans running them. Dr. Yishai, thank you for being on Entrepreneurial Excellence. It is great to see you again. I always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. And there's always this isn't therapy. It's also the coaching and the therapy I do are very separate things, even though obviously my psychology background is a really big part of how I think about and help founders. And I love how aligned we are with how much we care about really helping founders just reach their highest heights.
The world is a better place when more founders can be successful. So the more we can do that, the better world we build, essentially. So a question I ask everybody right at the beginning of the show is pretty simple. You're someone, once again, who's worked with, I don't know how many dozens or hundreds of founders and have truly read and studied in more depth than most of us ever have. How do you define entrepreneurial excellence? Like, what makes an excellent founder?
Ooh, that's a great question. So when I'm talking to a founder, and I talk to a lot of founders, and I work with a few handful all the time. When I talk to founders, one of the things I'm really tracking is how clear they are about what they want and how easily or smoothly they're kind of on the path to be getting that. And that doesn't mean that they're not doing hard work or don't have a hard work ethic. Some of them actually have the biggest work ethic that I've ever seen. I know founders who work. I chat with founders who work 90, 100-hour weeks. But there's a difference between that feeling like they're running through or swimming through molasses and those who feel like they really they're kind of like swimming in a river that's pushing them forward. So that's one thing that I really track. And the founders that I think are like really living their potential and making the biggest impact are the ones who have the most alignment in that particular kind of way.
So wait, maybe make that more concrete for me. Like, how do you get alignment in that framework? Is this alignment being like, I can work 90 hours and that makes me happy? Is that like what alignment looks like? Or what does it mean to be aligned?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some founders actually genuinely enjoy the work they're doing, and doing it 90 hours doesn't feel like work. Or the goal matters so much to them, and to them, it is their world. And so the working doesn't have the same quality. There are other people who want a lifestyle business, or they don't want to work more than 40 hours a week, or for them, their marriage or their family is really important to them, or even dating might be an important part of their lives, or spending time with friends is part of their lives. And so the thing about alignment is that it's not trying to force ourselves to be other than who we are. It's about being really clear on what that is and what that looks like, and pursuing what we want without creating or getting stuck in all conflicts and feeling like we have to do trade-offs or sacrifices all the time. Like, one of the biggest things that I see with founders that gets in their way is every time they're working, they're feeling guilty that they're not with their girlfriend or their spouse or kids. And when they're with their families or with their friends, they're feeling guilty that they're not working on their business. And if you're doing that, how much energy are you spending handling all of that, as opposed to putting the energy in the thing that you really want to be in?
And so how do you become good at putting the energy in the right places? Like, so are you saying essentially like being a great entrepreneur is somebody who can put the energy in the places that they care about the most and feel totally aligned with it? So maybe using an example, right, that one that everyone knows, Elon Musk, right? Is Elon Musk truly from the money he has earned or he's worth, one would argue he's a great entrepreneur. But is it actually more from your definition, he's an excellent entrepreneur? Because he clearly seems like pretty aligned. Like, doing the work for Tesla or SpaceX or whatever does not seem to be work for him. It's certainly to the detriment of being a great father and a bunch of other things, but it doesn't seem like he cares. So is that actually him being aligned?
It's an interesting question. I'll say from the outside, it's really easy to like judge it. Without having a conversation with him, I actually wouldn't be able to tell. And that's in part because how someone's behaving and even some of the results they get doesn't tell you how aligned they are. Just like somebody who's in a corporate business, like in a corporate role and making tons of money, doesn't tell you about how happy they are.
But wouldn't you argue, or at least I'm going to argue in this case, that like you have to be aligned to be good at your job. You have to have some level of alignment. Like I can't be a great entrepreneur or employee or you name it if I'm not at least somewhat aligned. Like if I'm not feeling good about the time I'm spending at my job, forget even being an entrepreneur, wouldn't I not be good at my job because I'm clearly not enjoying it, or I'm thinking about, oh, I can't wait till the day's over at 5 p.m. and I can clock out and do whatever. You're not going to be good at your job, and you probably won't be promoted, and you won't like it, and you won't be successful.
Yeah. So I want to separate two things out because they're really important. One is, can you be successful and not aligned? Yes. There are lots of people who are. In fact, there are people who get to a point of being successful, and then whether they have an exit or they decide to quit, um, it's not sustainable for them. And so a person can be successful and not fully aligned, but that's also not them realizing their highest potential. And so there's plenty of room or stuff that there's a kind of level of fulfillment and success they're not living in because they're not aligned. And so can you have success? I know people who've had lots of success, who've had exits, who weren't fully in alignment. I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make. And so even someone like Elon Musk, who again, I don't know, I haven't had the conversation with him to be able to tell how aligned he is. Like we can assume, it's easy to assume that he must be aligned because of the level of success he has, when actually we don't know. We just know of what he's realized. And unless we actually have a conversation, it's actually really difficult to parse that out. I can tell you how I understand that when I'm sitting and talking with someone. But that is really important. The other side of that is that for any individual who wants to really fulfill their potential or wants to create their success as quickly as and as smoothly as they possibly could for themselves, alignment is definitely a really big piece of that. It's kind of like internal alignment.
So do you to get aligned then, are you setting that up intentionality, like some intention beforehand? Like is the alignment that says, I'm going to go start a company and I want to work 90 hours a week and have no distractions. And I'm going to assume that I won't have a lot of relationships outside of work, et cetera, et cetera. That's one version of alignment. Or another one might be, hey, I only want to work 50 or 60 hours a week and have a family and be a good father. Or like, how do you know you are aligned as a founder? And do you set that up properly for you? And then you're just, okay, I made a decision. I'm hopefully a rational adult. I'm going, like, I'll give you an example. For myself, and personally, I think about myself as a hopefully mostly rational individual and have thought like there are certain things I want to achieve and accomplish and how to do them. And I have to weigh all these different elements. And I recognize that I give up some things by doing that, right? I recognize that I've given up probably some personal relationships or outside of work experiences over the past 15 or 20 years because I wanted to dedicate myself to building a quote unquote, successful career. But I'm okay with that. Like that feels aligned to me because I made that decision a long time ago. Is that alignment or am I misaligned? Or how does a founder do that today for themselves?
Yeah. So my take usually, and if you and I were sitting and chatting about it, a question that I would really ask and want to understand deeply is, are there any parts of you that are regretful about it or wish that it would be or could be different? And something that I notice is there are times frequently people pit things against each other. Like I
Mm.
must choose either one or the other. When it's actually more often closer to truth that if I'm really clear about what my priorities are and how much of them belong in my life, then I can be intentional of around how much and what I put where. So if we think about it this way, I heard this analogy and I really loved it. Let's say every day they wake up, they have $24 in their wallet and they need to figure out how they're going to spend it. And they're going to spend probably about 6 or 8 of it sleeping. The dollars are their hours, right? So we spend hopefully, a decent amount sleeping, depends on how much you actually
I
want to
just gotta say,
for the
healthy
rest of your time.
sleep's critical.
And different bodies are different. So it's not like an average works for everybody. But you spend some of those, but then you have the rest. And it's about selecting how much are you spending on what when. And for a person who's aligned, and that can change, by the way, in seasons of life. So alignment looked different for me before I was married, and it looked different before I had a daughter. It looks very different now than it did then, because the way that I would spend those dollars, those hours, looks different now than it did then. And the ideal for me is different. And so the thought process of the evaluation, the questions are not around, did I not just like I made that decision for me, now I need to stick with it. It's how how much do I want the different parts of my life to exist, and how am I essentially arranging them?
And so it's essentially saying like every part of my life is aligned. So I could say like there's the personal side, the professional side, the health side of my life. Maybe those are the three key parts. And if all those feel like they are aligned with my goals today, then I am aligned. And then that makes me an excellent entrepreneur, just to bring it all home in a sense.
Well, you're likely to go furthest if you're not. So the conditions that create, for example, feeling guilt or uh, being preoccupied about me not spending time, like being regretful about not spending time with my family while I'm working, is because some part of me says, "Oh, I really want to be experiencing presence with my family, maybe more than I currently am, or in a way that I'm not currently doing, or in a way that I haven't been doing."
Mhm.
And so that we need to solve for that thing in order for our brains to tell us like, okay, that part of me is satisfied. Or sometimes there might be a season, like if I'm doing a launch or if a client of mine is doing a launch, and it's like, well, we're going to be really heads down for 8 weeks or 10 weeks or some period of time. And then the question is not, how long are we going to sustain that, or let's go straight into the next launch. It's how do we feed the other parts of you that still need feeding? How do we make sure that all the parts of you are getting fed? That's a very different experience, and it's a different frame. It's not that I need to sacrifice things. It's about what's important to me and where and how much do I put that.
And so are you then constantly reevaluating is the idea in saying like, what is my alignment? What is my correct alignment based on where I am today?
Yeah, so I don't think we need to do a constant reevaluation. In fact, my view is that anytime we have an emotion, whether it's guilt or frustration or fear, that emotion is actually designed to give us data. And so I don't think we need to always be actively like reevaluating, as long as we understand that, ooh, if I'm feeling like, if when I'm working, there's some part of me that in the back of my head that's like, gosh, I really want to be, or I should be spending more time with my wife, or I didn't really spend time with my daughter last night, and I really like wish that I had more quality time with my daughter, and I don't need to go reevaluating my day just to recognize and register. Oh, that means that this is important to me.
Mhm.
Okay, if I took 2 minutes in that moment, presuming I could take 2 minutes or 30 seconds and ask myself, like, okay, so what decision or commitment can I make now to make sure that that gets addressed, or that I will be addressing it? So I might make a commitment that tonight I'm going to carve out a half hour to sit with my daughter and read with her and cuddle with her before bedtime or at bedtime. But what's likely to occur is I've actually addressed, and I don't need to go recalibrating my whole life all the time.
Mhm.
I don't need to go like reevaluating my whole life all the time. Um, People often think that balance is a static thing. But balance is a little bit more akin to, if you do martial arts or dancing, that there's a movement and a flow and an energy, and we're often kind of holding ourselves or our weight in a different way. It's like every time we take a step, we shift our weight to the foot that's on the floor, and then we move the other one. And so balance looks a little bit more like making sure that we are moving, and that we're also shifting our weight, shifting our priorities and our time in a way that uh, gets our goals, the things that matter to us, covered.
Yep. And then is that just to bring it home on the excellent entrepreneur part? Is that then how you like the entrepreneurs you think are most excellent in a sense? Are those the ones who are most aligned essentially on a regular basis? And then therefore, when they look back on their career as an entrepreneur, they can look back and say, you know what, I felt pretty much pretty good on a day as much as you can on a day-to-day basis as an entrepreneur. I felt pretty good about where I am. Is that what an excellent entrepreneur means then?
I think they're way more likely to have the experience of, when I was at work, I was doing work and things were really moving. And
Mm,
when I was not at work, I was really present in what I was doing and I was having a really great time. So I felt really fulfilled and I was really taking care of myself and I was fully resourced, whether that's to be with my friends and going out and having fun, or with my family, or that when I'm in the work, that I'm well resourced enough that I'm actually moving the needle on my business, on my goals, on the things that I'm trying to accomplish. And again, it really depends on the size of that. I have clients whose goals and vision include changing an entire industry. What that requires is a very different set of priorities. And the thing that sometimes we'll sit around and evaluate is, okay, how important is it to you to do that? And how do we fit or how do we set our priorities in context and around that? And a piece of that sometimes that comes up is how accepting are you of the things that really truly matter to you?
Mhm.
Because sometimes what happens is we get in our head, well, I'm supposed to spend more time with my family. And rather than saying, here's an amount of time and presence for me to be with my family that makes sense to me and that I'm fully willing to own given the context and all the things that I want to accomplish. And that's a set of conversations that you both have with yourself until you have that level of clarity, and then you have with the people around you, whether it's your spouse, your kids, even your friends. And the more clear we are with ourselves, the more we accept ourselves, the more likely it is that we can also come to people and say, here's who I am, here's what I need, or how I'm going to be in the world. And sometimes some people may not be super happy with that, or they might have their own frustrations about it. Chat with them about it, and you'd be surprised at how much more accepting people are of us when we're not making commitments to them that are commitments we think or are commitments that come from, well, I should spend more time with my kid, as opposed to like, I have a couple of hours to really spend with you in a given week. I would love to make it as special as possible. Let's be intentional about that.
So it's really about being intentional. And if you look at the top well-known founders in the world that everyone talks about, like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, you name it, right? Some of these really famous people. Um, how intentional do you think they were when it came? Like, if you look at these people who got famous for being great entrepreneurs, in a sense, or even ones you're working with directly who maybe aren't super famous but maybe are very very successful, quote unquote successful. Do you think they are super aligned? Or like, is it essentially what I'm trying to ask is like, is it possible to be incredibly aligned in all the different elements of your life and still achieve outsized, ego-driven type returns?
That's interesting. I mean, there's a different question that relates to that is how much leverage you have and how much your strategy of deploying leverage. So there are people I know who work 5, 10 hours a week, um, and they have seven-figure businesses. And like, if that's what you're aiming at, or if that's what you want, which is probably closer to a lifestyle business, then it becomes a matter of, okay, what's the path chart to get to that place? There are people who want to have a much bigger impact and solve bigger, harder, hairier problems. And that requires a different approach. Um, Now, there are some people, and again, it it really has to do with the level of intentionality. Because if you look at someone like Richard Branson, who his like superpower is to get really talented people and get them on board with the goal, the mission, and have them set up the companies and
Yeah.
run the companies to do that. And so the other piece of that is how, not just how aligned we are with what we want, but how clearly we see ourselves, how in reality we are about and how truthful we are about our own skills. And you can call them superpowers or zone of genius, and what is capable of that. Now, there's a tension here that is very important, which is the tension between being grounded in the reality and having a vision for something that is bigger, greater, uh, outside of reality, because it's really easy for us to say reality becomes a reason, or it's like
Mhm.
the excuse for not trying to accomplish more. One of the things I see is sometimes for leaders, it's the tension of holding those things and how well they can hold those two things together that really determines how well they navigate it.
Yep. Okay. So going off that subject a bit, well, I'm sure we'll come back to it at some point, with alignment and everything. But talk a little bit more about yourself, right? You could have built a kind of traditional clinical practice, right? Um, but you instead decided to focus on founders, business owners, things like that. Why why that population versus all the other people in the world who also need a level of help and help from someone like you?
That's a good question. So one of the things that I realized, this actually dovetails really nicely on the conversation we're just having. So when I decided I wanted to pursue being a psychologist, and I had a lot of reasons for it. One of them was that it was just so fascinating to me. And Another one was that I saw a set of challenges or problems that in some ways I experienced in my own life and I saw a lot of other people experiencing. I was like, gosh, if we could figure these things out, like so many things would get easier. Um, and I pursued that path in a really like formal education way. And I followed that path obviously all the way to the end in getting my doctorate and getting licensed as a psychologist. And along the way, I obviously learned a ton and had a lot of mentors. And one of the places that I worked when I was doing my, like after I got my doctorate, doing my essentially postdoctoral residency, like getting the hours to get my license. I actually worked at a practice in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, in Herald Square. And when I was there, I worked with all kinds of people. We took all kinds of insurance. There, it was the practice owner had a bunch of therapists who worked under them, and I was one of them. And uh, we worked with all kinds of people. And one of the things that I immediately started noticing is I ended up working with people who were award-winning artists, athletes, as well as founders and co-founders. And the co-founders are usually couples if they came
Mm.
in, um, rather than at the time at least. And I also worked with people who were in tech and finance and um, doctors and lawyers and people who were like in all these different areas and arenas. And I one of the things I discovered at the time was that working with people who were high performers, both I experienced, it was a thrill. It was so much fun for me. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
And they got so much more leverage out of the work that we were doing compared to when I was working with, for example, clients who were like moderately or severely depressed or like were debilitatedly like anxious or had trauma. And don't get me wrong, like I I so much empathy and I love them so much. And those kinds of clients, part of being honest with myself was I'm not the right person to give them their best service.
Yeah. I mean, like that's, I think in a way, I mean, you're kind of describing, tell me if this sounds accurate, but like we all curate the people in our lives in a sense, right? You made a conscious choice to curate the type of patients you work with in a sense. Patients, maybe a weird term for coaching, but like patients that you work,
Patients are in the clinical side, yes.
right? But
Yep.
but the people you work with in general, you kind of made a conscious decision that you wanted to work with certain groups. That's just what brings you energy, right? For obviously
Yep.
everyone gets energy from different types of things. I would not also get energy from dealing with people who are having more of those challenges. Hence, I try to work with a lot of entrepreneurs and who are trying to build a ton of new things, and they have plenty of their own challenges and issues. But so it's kind of what you're saying. It sounds like.
Yeah. And the more honest I was with myself, the clearer it became that me, like even in the clinical work, working with people who are on the higher performer side was going to be way better for them and way more fun for me and therefore more sustainable. And so that's actually the direction I went. I mean, after I got licensed, I still worked at that practice, and I supervised and trained other clinicians, which I also found was an absolute blast. And then when I chose to move on and I started my own practice, I specifically was doing clinical work with high performers.
Mm.
And so then I ended up working with people who were in finance and tech, and some of them were also, operators of businesses or leaders in businesses, or in the corporate world. And that was still at the time more focused on the clinical work. So it was like they were experiencing anxiety or they were experiencing kinds of stress or relationship issues or, a set of things. And as as I did more of that work, one of the things that I really discovered was I really found that me working with people who were in positions of leadership, which often went beyond just the clinical work of like whatever their diagnosis is and their symptoms and all of that, that helping them gain more leverage in how they are operating and working in their businesses and for their businesses was so both fascinating to me, and also I started getting commentary from them on how like incredibly impactful it was. And that's the thing that actually got me interested in looking into what doing an executive coaching or starting an executive coaching practice is, which is I actually started that completely separate. I wanted to keep them separate very intentionally. And that really brought me to the place of recognizing that like I have a background in psychology and it's not specifically the clinical stuff. It's the the way that I've learned to think, I found is incredibly applicable
Mhm.
in the coaching environment, for founders and
Is it
for
just?
executives.
Do you think it's applicable because founders might not want to admit they need clinical help, but everyone says they should get an executive coach. So it basically becomes kind of the same thing, or why is it so
Hmm.
helpful?
That's really interesting. So I'll tell you this, and this comes to the distinction between coaching and therapy. One of my mentors, who's a psychologist, he he said something really interesting to me. He said, everything like a therapist, if you think about concentric circles, what a therapist can do includes everything that coaching could do and a
Mhm.
bunch more. Therapists can diagnose and do clinical, work and all of that stuff. And inside of that, there's a subset of things that would be considered coaching, which is helping people have better performance, have better relationships in a way that's not just like clinical diagnostic therapy stuff that therapists are very well equipped to help with. And so someone who's licensed as a therapist often has that set of skills or could apply that set of skills depending on how, what their strengths are. Inside of that, there's a smaller circle that's coaching, and coaching is helping people see things in a way that allows them to kind of maximize accomplishing or getting to their goals,
Mhm.
particularly performance coaching. And of course, some coaching includes, having expertise in a domain or a field that maybe some clinicians don't have, though there are a lot of clinicians who come from a background, they have other jobs they came from or other backgrounds that came from, and they can, kind of port that over. But those are like, in a way, therapy can include, or a lot of the training include, at least for me, things that are very applicable in the coaching world. But coaches don't necessarily get trained, and their job isn't to do the therapy clinical stuff. If somebody, and even when I'm doing coaching, if a coaching client of mine comes to me and it's really clear that they're having some kind of like anxiety attack or more like a panic attack. If they're having like a clinical panic attack, and they talk about having that all the time, or they're dealing with something that's a clinical issue, I'll actually refer them to a therapist
Mm. You
because
would
they're
just remove
separate.
them over to your other practice. Like, hey, let me
No,
just
oh God, no. No, absolutely not. No, I wouldn't wanna mix that up.
refer them to yourself.
No, no, absolutely not. No way. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I wouldn't want to mix up, like, if somebody's in my clinical practice and they wanna talk about something that's, like, in the realm of coaching, we can do a little bit of that, but they're clearly in the clinical kind of zone.
What percentage of founders that you talk with, or entrepreneurs, really, I should say, should have a coach? And then what percentage of those, maybe same people or just overall people, should also have a therapist of some sort? Like, if you think about the overall population of entrepreneurs, should everyone get a coach and should everyone have a therapist, or what does that look like?
My view is that I think all founders could really benefit from having almost every founder could benefit from having a performance coach,
Mhm.
which is a little bit different than just like a business coach. Performance coach specifically will help you see when there are these these kind of distortions or ways that you see yourself or the world or what you think is going to happen that actually get in the way of you making the best set of decisions with the information that you have. Which doesn't mean they're always going to be right, but the cleaner we can see all of that, the easier and smoother a lot of the things that can feel really bumpy can get. And so having a performance coach, I actually think is incredibly helpful. I don't know that all people or all founders or all entrepreneurs need a therapist. I mean, I think for many people, it's very clear if you have some clinical level issue, and I will acknowledge founders do have a higher tendency of having certain kinds of. There's actually some research on that. So like
Yes. That's what they are, actually.
the prevalence of certain, clinical disorders is substantially higher in like the founder population. And obviously for those people, definitely I recommend having a therapist.
Yeah.
I would also recommend that being most likely separate from whatever coaching there is, because trying to manage something that's a clinical issue in the context of coaching, I mean, it's kind of like going to urgent care to get like emergency surgery.
Yep.
It's just, like, not the right place to go to get the thing, and I do like, absolutely someone who's dealing with a mental health issue needs to have someone who's trained and,
Yeah, for sure.
and licensed to do that, and the context also matters, like, knowing and having a relationship that's separate just for that purpose, I think is really beneficial and really useful and completely separate. Does that answer the percentage questions? I don't know, I do think that, like, I think a lot of, founders are now given the advice of having a coach.
Mhm.
I think the quality of coaches varies wildly, as does the approaches that coaches take. And performance coaching, which most people who think about or talk about performance coaching are thinking and talking about habits and like routines and systems and stuff like that, which is like less than 1% of what I even think about with my clients.
Mhm.
And some performance coaches almost entirely focus on that. Having a performance coach is incredibly, incredibly helpful, even beyond having a business coach or a coach who knows the industry that you're in and can help you with the business side of things. Now, I actually help my clients with both. Um,
How do you find a great coach or therapist? Like as you said, there's a lot of them out there.
mhm,
It seems so difficult to know who's going to be good or not good. In that, not only good or not good, but also a fit for me as an individual. So, how do you go
mhm.
about
Yep.
identifying? How as a founder or entrepreneur do you find that person?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have a conversation all the time on the coaching side and also sometimes on the therapy side, whether that's with coaching clients or people that I'm just chatting with. Um, the perspective I would offer is it's almost the same as hiring. You need to be really clear about what the role and the job description is that you need. And I know that can
Also,
be challenging.
especially with a coach,
Right.
you're
Yeah.
telling me a coach. I don't really know what that means. And I'll add, like, I think most founders, almost by definition of being a founder and entrepreneur, you have some sort of ego, right? You think you are world class at something,
Mhm.
and that's why you're doing. That's why you're taking this massive risk. Is because you already think you're world class, which probably means there's not a lot of space in your ego to say, well, actually, I probably need some help to get there. So
Huh. That's interesting.
how
I
do
mean,
you accept that fact? And
it's a great
then
question.
then identify, then build that JD for what you actually need help with.
That's a great question. So, uh, my view is that in my experience, most founders have a sense that they can make a really substantial impact on the world. They certainly want to, and often they really have a very strong belief that they can. And I actually believe the stronger that belief, the the greater carry you have. Like, there's so much you can carry with that. I actually don't necessarily think that it's the case that that ego means that we don't need help. I think that if we mix up, and sometimes some people do, this is one of the distortions people have in the view of themselves, or can have in the view of themselves. And some founders may have this. I haven't found it to be the case for most founders that I've chatted with, but some founders might have a view of themselves saying that if I ever get any help from somebody, it means I'm not capable,
Mhm.
even if that's in a domain that is not my expertise. Which, if we just take a step back and think about that, that's a very distorted view of identity or sense of self. It's a pretty distorted view about how the world works because the nature of being excellent at something more often than not means that we over invest. We intentionally put an outsized disproportionate amount of our time and energy into getting good at that and deploying that as our asymmetric advantage, which
Great.
by definition then means that we are going to have other areas that we are not putting as much of our time, energy, effort, and we're not going to be as talented or skilled at. Um, it's like we don't have a superhuman who's perfect at everything.
Mhm.
It just doesn't exist. Doesn't even make sense to imagine that that could exist. And having or holding or trying to hold that view of ourselves is only going to create a position in which we are constantly trying to prove or need to prove to ourselves and other people that we are perfect or are great or don't need help, which itself is likely to get in the way. I mean, imagine if all that energy stopped having to be spent on that and got spent on your asymmetric advantage.
Well, this is such a strong point that I hope people take back with them, because we deal with this at my company, right, Chore, all the time, where founders say, "Oh, like, all these founders and entrepreneurs are great at whatever they're building their company in," and then we say, "Hey, you should go use Chore to run your entire operations."
Mhm.
They're like, "Oh, I can do it myself." I'm like, I get that you think you could. That doesn't mean you should, because once again, you have this asymmetric advantage in something else. And so this is why I would posit that a lot of people ignore needing coaching or
Mhm.
therapy, because once again, they think they can do it all themselves,
Yeah.
or
So,
they're being too
Mhm.
cheap, and they don't realize that by being so frugal, they're actually hurting the outcomes for their company and themselves.
Yeah. I wouldn't disagree with them that they can. I would say, I bet you can. I wonder what the cost of that is to you.
I love that. I'm gonna like, write that down.
Uh-huh. I tend not to just like straight up disagree or clash with people. I just like in my world, it's a matter of being really intentional. Intentionality means I'm really clear on the stuff that I'm exceedingly good at. And I deploy myself as much as possible in that because it's the thing that I love. It's the thing that I'm exceedingly great at. And it then becomes really clear that putting my time into other places is really just not worthwhile.
So then going back to the question then, let's pretend that someone actually has a decent idea of what they maybe need. They say, okay, like I
Mhm.
have an asymmetric advantage in AI, but I don't really know how to manage a team. Like I don't have it.
Perfect.
So how do I then go about, wrote that into my JD for a coach. How do I go find a coach?
Yeah. So one of the things that a lot of people will do is they'll start to ask their network.
Hmm.
I think it's a great thing to ask their network. I also recommend interviewing a bunch of coaches. Like, think about it like hiring somebody. What would you do? The first thing you do, which you laid out beautifully, is we get very clear on what it is that we want or need right now.
Hmm.
And it might be what we think we need, which when we talk to coaches, we might find out there's something else that we need than what we thought, which is totally fine. But we first start there. And then the second thing is we work on sourcing. So let's go source some coaches. And I think that's great. In fact, a bunch of my clients that like when they started chatting with me, they said at the time that they were looking to find a coach, they said, "Oh, by the way, we're interviewing a bunch of coaches." I'm like, "Fantastic! This is the best thing I could possibly imagine for you." And I just love giving them pointers. Like, here's some things for you to look at. Like, help me understand what you're really looking for. Let me give you some pointers. And like, the whole point is for me to help you find what's best for you, not for me to try to be your coach. I don't need to be everyone's coach. In fact, I'm very clear that there are some things that I have an asymmetric advantage on, and therefore I'd be an excellent coach for some people in some situations, and I'd be a terrible coach for other founders or other executives in other situations and positions. And I don't want to be that coach. I have no interest in that.
And
Yeah.
how do I as a founder put an ROI on the value of coaching? So let me explain that maybe really concretely there, right? Like, so there's lots of things that I don't have asymmetric advantages on, in which I probably should outsource or delegate or get help with. How do I decide that I should spend $2,000 a month on chore for operations and $10,000 a month on a world-class coach? I don't know what you cost per month, but like, some world-class coaches are $5,000 to $10,000 a month. How do I decide if that's an ROI positive thing versus all the other choices that I can make with that $60,000 to $120,000?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the things that we need to do first are understand where you are in your business. If your business is hardly making 10 or 20K in revenue in a given month, like you're just not going to be able to foot that, which is totally understandable. We can have a conversation with funded companies, their burn rate, and thinking about that. And is it worth investing what percentage of their burn rate or adding to their burn rate by getting a coach? Ultimately, the thought process is if understanding what your constraints are and whether or not having a coach is going to help you move through those constraints faster so that it is a greater return on the capital that you're investing than you just doing it yourself. It's like it's a math equation. We do need to get like there's a lot of variables, so we want to sit down and get the variables. But like, I'll just give you an example. The other day I was talking to someone whose business was at 40K a month. And they've had in the past, 80, 100K months. But for some reason they were really kind of getting stuck around the 40K space. And in the conversation I was having with them, what became clear is they actually know all the strategies and stuff. What was really missing was, as I had more conversation with them, it became really clear to me that they have some very compelling reasons to never let their company grow past its minimum viable place,
Hmm.
which is why, from my vantage point, it was probably being held there because the person's extremely capable of growing their business.
Yep.
And we even talked about some of the business stuff that they could be doing and what they're not doing and some of the reason why. And one of the questions that I asked was, what do you think would change if you doubled your revenue? And they started talking about all the great things. Well, this would be possible and that be possible. Like, yeah, that part of you we already know. That part of you wants to grow. I'm talking about the part of you that actually might not be so thrilled about it. So if there's any part of you, any thought, any
Sure.
feeling, any hesitancy, anything, that's the thing that we need to really understand. Because if we don't address that part of you is actually currently controlling what you're doing.
So it's interesting. So I have a funny sales note in a sense, or not sales note, but like the when I think about sales strategy, and this sort of off topic but very clear on topic, which is like I love coaching in a sense that it is so much easier for people to justify spending the money on a coach because like, well, if I have this one extra decision that my coach helps me make strategically that changes my business, it's worth all the money I could ever spend.
Mm.
But if I go outsource and delegate, my own thing, but like back office work, and I get an extra 20 hours a month because I did that, well, that might not be worth the ROI. But this one strategic decision, it's just so funny how people psychologically think
Yeah.
where you can't actually metric the value of a coach. So therefore, it's harder to put a dollar value on it.
That's interesting. I think you can metric the value of a coach, but I've been tracking this with a bunch of different clients over time. So as an example, so one of the clients I started working with, at the time I started working with him, what he wanted was to really have the experience of performing at his best more often. I said, okay, so what's the deal?
Yeah.
He said, well, right now,
Find what's your best more often. And there's
yeah.
lots of
I
definite.
said, let's just put some numbers to it. Tell me how many days a year do you have the experience of like performing your best? And he was like, probably about 10. I said, okay. And how much of your work gets done during that time? He's like, probably like 90, 80 or 90% of the stuff that really moves on those like 10 days a year. I said, okay. So if you, what would success look like for you to have a coach who has that improvement? Like what improvement would justify the spend? He's like, well, if I could double it. I said, okay, so from 10 of those days to 20 of those days a year, that would be great. I said, great, we're going to start tracking this. 6 months later, I'd asked him, I said, okay, so over the, like, what's it looking like now? And he said, well, over the last quarter, I've had 50 of those days.
So you way blew past the number.
50 over a quarter. Yeah. I mean, so it was 10 in a year to 50 in a quarter, which is basically a 20x.
Yeah, right there.
Right.
Sign up for Dr. Yishai right now. Get him.
So, I mean, that doesn't mean that like that's going to be applicable for everybody, but notice that like I am very intentional about tracking those things, and some of the metrics are qualitative, some of them are quantitative, but that's one way of tracking it because what this person wanted to experience is more of those days where decisions were really obvious and really clear, and movement was really happening, and they noticed that like 90% of the big things that occurred over the year happened in that context, and I was like, okay, so how do we get you more of those days? And that was a thing that happened over the course of just 6 months, and we're still working together. I mean, most of my clients, they say they sign up and just start working, and we keep working for years and years. So to your point of like, how do you justify the metric, or how do you justify what it is? Some of that comes back to what is the really clear goal or set of things that you want to accomplish. Now, can you justify a coach based on some revenue goals? There's some possibility. Like I said, I had a client who's what they want is probably to double or 2.5x their business. It's also really clear to me because of the conversation I had with them that they have had months like that. It's not that they're missing some strategy. What's missing was some set of internal things that changed their incentives so that growing their business was actually more costly than staying smaller. And they're willing to pay that cost for a lot of reasons that were, both personal and related to some views that they held about themselves and the world and what they thought was going to happen when that changed. And the more that we clarified and worked on those things and I gave different way of looking at it, the framing shifted so that the math shifted. So then it actually made sense to grow the business. And then they're kind of off to the races.
Yeah. So then to me, the question then about when to finding a coach is there or next question about whether to get a coach and find a coach kind of leads to me comes down to AI to some extent, right? Where does AI fit into this? And how does that fit? So what I mean, maybe make it really specific. I have a coach myself right now. I've had various coaches over my career. Sometimes don't have any. Sometimes I have. Rarely do. Most of our work is actually we sort of do quick voice chats. It's not like doing actual calls. But I also created an AI project essentially for coaching. It is trained on my executive coach stuff, but also lots of other coaches, like super well-known coaches and their own teachings and learnings and everything else. And I'm trying to figure out which one's better. Obviously, like the AI coach costs me essentially close to nothing. And it's trained on the world's knowledge, and it has all of my context and information of everything that's happening on a regular basis. Is that potentially better than a human coach, or at least is better in the short term when I need an answer? It's always available. It's always on, right? My coach, even if he responds quickly, might take 24 hours. Whereas my AI will respond to me in 30 seconds.
Yeah. And I've seen some coaches actually doing this where they create they'll kind of name it like, whatever the coach name is, AI, right? I haven't done this, but it could be a Yishai.
I mean, you already should have AI on saying the
I don't.
last part of your name. So it's just the Dr. Yish.
Dr. Yish AI, right? No, I don't, and I currently don't have plans to. And
You
some of the reasons
should get that domain, Dr. You should do Dr.
Yish.ai.
That AI should be a domain name that you own right now. Go buy that before we publish this.
Go buy it. Yeah.
Go buy that domain name.
Yeah. So the role of AI. So one of the things that AI can sometimes do is if you ask it, what am I not seeing here? It can point out some stuff. The thing about it is that as much as we try to hand it our psychology and we try to give it, data on our business, and we want to give it all, and we give it all this context from all of these different, coaching models and stuff, and it can probably spit out a bunch of stuff. And a good chunk of that may be helpful at a time you're asking. It's like querying a database in a sense. And can it provide some value there? I think it could. Some of the stuff that's way more subtle and way more challenging is how and when to apply which kinds of approaches at what moment in what way, which is the kind of thing that I, at least to this day, and I've done plenty of prompting AI to try to get it to do coaching. And what I've noticed is that it will do the thing where it applies what might be useful or applicable in the moment, which is very different than sometimes the thing that we really need is kind of hiding in plain sight.
So essentially it's giving you like the answer right now and not the deeper psychological thing to work on.
Almost similar framing. Yeah. It's like, by definition, a blind spot is a thing that we can't see.
Mhm.
And handing AI all the context is not necessarily going to make it perfect at seeing those things either.
Well, right. Especially when it's almost every AI, even if you try to train it not to, has some levels like sycophancy in it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. AIs are,
does.
at least the way they operate right now, they respond based on some set of probability.
Mhm.
And they're exploring various kinds of probability, and a harness is just kind of like limiting that probability to some area. So when you feed it all this stuff from different coaching approaches, it's going to pick one of those and follow that along, which is very different. It's just like a different approach, and you're going to get a different result than somebody who is like trained and has lots of experience in understanding exactly where your blind spots are and can detect it through the way that your language and micro expressions are
Mm.
showing up in the conversation you're having. I had a client who I was just like asking them some questions, and they made a comment that it was really clear to me that like 99 out of 100 people would not even register the language that they used and the moment of hesitation. And I just stopped them right there. I was like, wait, what is that? And what ended up unfolding was one of the most important things, that it was a blind spot that they didn't even realize existed for them, that after we had chatted about it, completely changed how they viewed themselves in their business.
Oh, wow. And then as AI wouldn't find that, right? Because it's not a live conversation or it's essentially working for you versus being a partner.
So I don't know that I can predict what AI can or will or won't find. I just haven't had the experience of my clients and even the ones who use like AI all the time saying like, oh yeah, no, my AI is finding left and right all these blind spots that I have. And it's like really amazing. And it's changed the framing or way that I see things. And because of that, I'm like, blah, blah, blah. Like I just don't, I haven't heard that. I haven't seen it yet, which I don't know if it's like, I don't know, like capabilities of AI are changing all day, every day, but I just haven't really seen that and it's not something that my clients are experiencing.
Yeah, fair. It's to speak of like a founder's actual job and what do you think, like thinking under pressure, right? I think you talk about this a lot and some of the stuff that you've done, right? Like, I think you've said a bottleneck for founders is the ability to think under pressure. Unpack that a little bit for us and like, what does it look like? How do you work through it? And when like, should you not be thinking under pressure? Or how do you get good at thinking under pressure? Since maybe you have pressure every day. My company's failing. I have this employee who's like, in
Mhm.
trouble. Like you name it. There's always we're running out of there's a million reasons why you're under pressure. So unpack
Right.
that.
Yeah. So first thing is pressure is a perception.
Mm,
Pressure is an idea about the situation. And so the first thing that I think about, and the first way that I want to unpack it is how accurate is that to the situation and the person in the situation. So I'll give you an example. If I were to get slapped with a lawsuit today, it would be a very different experience than a law firm who deals with lawsuits all the time getting slapped with a lawsuit. Why?
because you don't have a lot of lawsuits.
Because I don't field lawsuits every day, multiple times a day, and I don't have an army of lawyers, right? And so framing on pressure, and one way that I look at this is if a person's experiencing stress, usually, so one of the things that I like to do, just back up for a second, is any given feeling or perception we have is a calculation that our brain is making.
Mhm.
And so stress is an experience our brain tags when we see that the stakes of something are really high, when we perceive the stakes are really high, comma, and there's a level of strain. It's beyond our current capacity to handle. So when someone is experiencing pressure, usually their stress levels are activated because their perception is the way they view the situation is that the stakes of this are significant. They're high, comma, and it's actually it does require me to expand or use beyond my capacity or my existing capacity. It's like something that I'm not amazing or great at, or not something that I do every day. It's not a run of the mill thing for me
And how do you
more
get,
often than not.
and I think I assume you'll clear, like, how do you get past that, right? So I feel like this happens to a lot of people, not only as a founder, but lots of people in their day-to-day lives, right? Where they are getting stressed about something they haven't seen before. It gives them anxiety. Then they play it out in their head of
Mhm.
like, even, maybe a simple example for a lot of people would be for people who don't fly very often, they get on an airplane and they're really scared and have a
Mhm.
lot of anxiety about it because like this plane could crash and I have no control. But that happens all the time for lots of people. It's
Mhm.
like, how do you get good at dealing with these unknown situations and handling that stress?
Yeah. So the first thing, one of the things that I like as a frame is if it's the first time you're handling it, this time is going to cost you more time, energy, and effort than any future time that it will
So it
ever
always
occur.
goes down from there.
It's only ever going to go down from there, you know. Well, for the most part, unless the situation changes drastically or the stakes change drastically or something else. But like that set of conditions is a different set of conditions. But like, yeah, the first time is going to take the most. But like, let's just back up for a second. The energy that it requires to walk takes the most for someone who is unable to walk, usually a child.
Mm.
And so they do a lot of falling and a lot of holding on to things and a lot of, going up and down and it's the process of building the muscles. Our whole system, our entire biology and neurology, like our brain cells and our nervous system, they're all designed to help make that easier over time. There's a reason that most grown-ups who have learned to walk and walk now don't need to think about walking. They just need to think about where they want to go. So recognizing that number one, if I'm stressed out, the first thing I need to understand is that if this is a new or novel situation, it's probably going to take the most energy that it possibly would
Hmm.
my entire career or life. And I find that actually to be really a big relief because I'm never going to have it as hard as I do right now.
This is the first time, and it's never going to be this bad after this.
Yeah. And also comma, and it frames, it will require a lot more energy from me, and I will probably get not the best result than like the, the energy to result ratio is only going to get better from here.
Mhm.
And so like the result might end up being fine. I might end up spending a ton of energy or time on it. The result might even be great, comma, and next time having done this before, it's going to get easier and the result is probably also going to be a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because that's typically at least the direction things go. And so that framing itself makes it okay to have that experience.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? It's like sometimes we're freaking out because we're thinking I'm not supposed to be having this experience. It's like, no, my body and my system's trying to tell me, like my brain's trying to clue me in, like, oh no, you need to gear up because it's gonna take a bunch of energy. And the result is like a little bit uncertain. And it might take more energy to get a better result or to help ensure we don't get, a terrible result. And I think, oh, that's great. Congratulations. Our brain is trying to get us and our head wrapped around what the reality is and how much effort we're going to need to put into it. Fantastic. Awesome. The second thing is pressure and stress. Usually, what they're doing in our bodies physiologically is they're trying to prepare and expand our body and our brain's ability to process and handle and address what needs to be addressed.
Mhm.
I like my view of it is if we see it that way, we can kind of open our arms and say thank you. Like, thank goodness that my body's doing this. Right. And you'd kind of noted this that some people's brains will start to kind of cycle on all the terrible things that could occur or
Mhm.
what might happen or all this stuff. And what I like to do is say, I understand my brain is what it's trying to do is get me to be aware of and prepare for the things that could happen so that I'm ready for them. So, like, rather than just letting that process run, I would prefer to be intentional about where to point that process. So let's get really tactical about it or practical about it. What is what is the worst case scenario? What's the likelihood that scenario comes up? What are the set of things that are worth preparing that my system tells me that I would feel comfortable and I wouldn't feel comfortable if I didn't prepare? That I want to be ready for those things. Great. That is my system telling me this is a place that's worth putting my energy. Great. However much that is, let me just allocate that. Like it's all very logical in my head, like in my world. And when I work with clients, like the the pressure and the stress themselves, or even the like feeling of worry and even like the cycling thoughts, they're all just trying to point us at something. Emotions are really logical. They're just data.
So how do you
Mhm.
how do you align that? How do you, as a person, either accept those things or hear it from someone like a coach? And I'll give you a really specific example because this just came up when you're talking through this. So my wife is going on a trip with my kids. I messed up on how I did the seats and set everything up, and so the long story short, they are in my two kids are sitting next to each other,
Mhm.
and it's a seat. It's an airplane that has 3 rows and 3 rows, right? So 6 across. They're sitting next to each other. My wife is 1 row behind them, and they're all in the very back of the plane, back
Mhm.
of the plane, right?
Mhm.
I feel bad that I messed this up. However, I actually have already reframed. I'm not going on this trip, to be clear, but I've already reframed this in my head. Like, this is a really cool opportunity. We can see if our kids can sit together by themselves without having a
Mhm.
parent directly in the row with them. Which my wife is literally right. Actually, I think she's right in front of them, but like she's right there. So it's not like she's far away. Can they sit by themselves for an airplane trip?
Mhm.
And a cool opportunity. Like, to me, like, that's a cool opportunity. What's it like sitting in the back of the plane? We're lucky enough that it's very rare that we're in the very fast row in the
Mhm.
airplane. But who knows? Maybe for two young kids, that could be freaking great that they're in the back of the airplane and they would love it. It might be more interesting for them. They get right to the bathroom. To me, like, I've already reframed this in my mind that this is really positive. But I know my wife would get really angry if I said that to her. That, like,
Mhm.
this is all really positive. She's probably be like, "You're trying to just spin this. It's like you messed up." And I'm like, "No, I totally messed up. I totally admit it." But like, let's go see if this is a cool opportunity to learn something new.
Mhm.
But how do you tell someone that? Or how do you accept
Yeah.
that as if I were in her shoes, how do I accept that, like, take on these new experiences where, hey, it didn't work the way we expected, but how do I say this is how if I were her, say, well, okay, this is something new and worst case scenario, I have to sit a row ahead, or the person might want to switch seats with me. They might not want to sit next to my two kids anyways.
Yeah.
But like, who knows?
Right. So there are a couple of things. One is I want to note this: your brain is making a prediction about what's going to happen if you were to share with her your frame of mind.
Hmm.
And what's really interesting is your brain might also have assumptions about how you'd approach that. If you have an agenda and you're trying to change her point of view, yeah, most people can sniff that out. I'll say especially spouses, but just most humans. If you ever had somebody come up to you and it was really clear they're trying to change your mind on something, like what happens?
They get all angry and they dig in.
We get resistant. Like, yeah, we like push back, right? And so one of the first things that I would actually offer as a reframe for you is like, yeah, of course your brain is predicting she'll resist it because you are aware, you've had previous experiences that coming with an agenda and trying to change someone's mind most likely is going to be met with resistance. So the first thing that we could do is just drop the agenda. Like, what if your job is to change your mind? Now, if you'd like to share something, we could talk about how you'd frame that. That framing is very different. That framing might be, hey, I was really stressed about this. I imagine you probably have your own thoughts, and I'd love to chat about. We don't need to change your mind on anything. I just had this thought, and the thought change actually changed things for me, and I'd love to share that
Mm,
with you. Like,
mm.
can I share with you the thing that's going on in my head? And now you genuinely need to not have an agenda because if you have a sneaky agenda, we still know that it's like still gonna get
But
acted
how do
for
you
you.
not
We're
have
really sniffing out.
the agenda? Like, if I want to sit here and share it, it still sounds like an agenda.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough, right? And so, comma, and the other part of that is to be very aware of and be present with where she's at and what
Mm,
her viewpoints are. So, well, the where I would go is like if she's stressed out about it, like, oh, what is that stress telling you? Like, are you expecting the stakes are really high? Like, what are the high stakes about this? Right? Just to use the kind of equation on stress, stakes times strain, right? So, what are the stakes on this? And what are you anticipating? What's like the worst case scenario here? And let some of that kind of play, like let her kind of put that on the table. And what's the anticipated strain? What's the thing that's going to be really tough or difficult that you're anticipating is going to happen? And then where I would go is instead of trying to change that, I'd be like, okay, so how do we help you get a viewpoint or be ready for whatever that might look like? And that's not to the exclusion of if there's a way for you to go fix it, go fix it. Like, if that's something that you wanted to do or plan on doing, but or acknowledge that you made the mistake, right? That it's just oh, instead of me trying to change you, I'm just going to be here with you. And the thing that your emotion system or your brain system is saying is a problem, we're actually going to help you with that so that you feel really clear on what it is that you would need or how you can be prepared and in what way I could be supportive of that process for you. Right. So like the thing that most people don't realize is that if you have an agenda for someone else, they're probably gonna push back, or if they accept it, it's gonna be pitted against what's going on for them, or they might experience it as, oh, what I'm thinking about or feeling about, like feeling, or what my emotions are trying to tell me doesn't really matter to this other person.
And how do I apply that to my team? Right. So as a founder and CEO, I'm busy, I'm moving fast. I don't always feel like I have time to sit there and draw someone out. You want to just say, here's the right direction, please just go. How do you do that? How do you do what you just described that I should work try to do with my spouse with your teammates?
It's a good question. So I'm going to start with upstream of that is a view about time and a view about leverage.
Mm, fair.
And the question is, what's your goal? If your goal is to get them to do the thing, you can tell them to do the thing, comma, and what's going to happen when you do that? Well, downstream, every time that they do or don't know what they're supposed to do, they're still going to come to you. And so, like, are you going to save time? It depends on your goal, and it depends on the nature and structure of both the org and your set of goals. So, like, if you'd like to do that, great.
is what you're saying basically like just tell me if I'm totally off on this, but like I think I get it, right? Which is essentially if your goal is to teach someone how to swim, you need to let them sort of like go figure it out themselves a little bit. If the goal is like, I just need you to get across this lake or whatever river, I'm just going to give you the boat and go do it. They still don't know how to swim, but like they can get across it right now. Is this
Yeah,
sort
if the
of
goal wasn't to, right. So broadly, yes, but in the swimming example, I would actually frame it differently, which is if I want someone to learn how to swim, I'm not just going to leave it to their own devices. Uh, if I deem that it's worthwhile to put in the time and energy to teach them how to swim, because that's the thing that matters, then I will prioritize creating and making the time to teach them how to swim, or I'll hire someone or put someone in a role to teach them how to do that. We want to make sure that they get the best possible instruction, given the set of resources that I have, because we're always kind of evaluating that. If I just leave them to their own devices, who knows what's going to happen? They might swing, they might swim. We could have a conversation about whether maybe I'm okay letting them sink and finding somebody who comes pre-installed with swimming. I kind of already learned how to swim. There's another conversation. But again, this really is all downstream of what exactly is my goal. And when we have clarity on that, we can then determine what the set of priorities are in order to make that happen. And as the founder or as the CEO, you may not need to do all of this with your own hands or your own mouth, but like what is very important is that ultimately the set of responsibilities are on you, that if you don't ensure that they are occurring, then something will occur. It just might not be aligned with or get you closer to the goal that you want with the amount of time and energy and effort that you're putting in.
Yep. No, fair. Going back, I mean, related to that, like going back to sort of the question we started this first section off, it's like, so how do I think under pressure? Like what is the solution to think under pressure? Is it just basically like reframing essentially and saying like, this is the first time that I'm ever going to see it? Or is there anything else I should do as a founder?
Yeah. So the first thing is to understand the current situation, because there may be times where my brain is framing it as pressure and it isn't. And so like under that kind of investigation, or like just kind of being curious and opening up and like figuring out like, what is this? Is this the first time? Some of that might fall away, and there are other times where there is like a legitimate pressure that there's a time crunch or something that's going on. And the thing that I would say is what we want to understand is what the pressure is telling us about the set of priorities. And the more we attend and attune to what the priorities are and what's the best way we can approach and address those priorities, given the time that we have, because usually when we're under pressure, there's some version of time, and given the stakes that are there, and given the level of like thoroughness or detail that we need to put into it, um, the more we're taking that pressure and using it to clarify, we're using it to clear the lens through which we're looking to make that decision. My view on it is no matter what experience we're having, if we can use that thought, that experience, that feeling to help clear the lens to say exactly what is it that we're looking at and what is it we're aiming at, and what are the set of resources and what are the set of constraints we have, and how do we deploy those best, then we're more likely to get a better response, and there's a difference between trying to ignore or push the pressure out versus actually welcoming it in and using it as data. And so that's like a really critical piece of it. So people that I see that operate really well under pressure, they're not just ignoring the pressure and they're not just on some version of autopilot. They're actually understanding the nature of that pressure. And sometimes what happens is the whole structure collapses under it. Like, oh, it's not really a big deal. I don't need to feel the pressure. And then all of that disappears. Other times it's like, oh no, there's something that really is a big deal, needs to get addressed. Okay, let's use that to understand and clarify exactly how much, time or energy do I estimate needs to be, invested into this? What's the level of result that we need? And what's the best set of decisions we can make to address that and address what might get in the way of that.
Great. No, I mean, it makes sense. And what's in like the reframing, I think is key in understanding it. Talk a little bit about like relationships, isolation, people around you that you surround yourself with as a founder. Is there like maybe really being really specific, like how do founders, like, is there a pattern you see that over and over again happens with founders and their co-founders? Like what predicts whether you're going to have a successful co-founder relationship?
Hmm.
And how do you figure that out as a founder? Because that's also one of the key reasons why, frankly, companies fail is
Yeah.
because the founders destroy each other. And it happens in relationships. You see this divorce happens all the time and it just
Yep.
destroys families and costs so much money and no one really wins but the lawyers. And it's similar things can happen with startups.
Yeah, we're talking about a very big, broad thing, which is applied in multiple domains. So one of the first things is, a bigger question about isolation and relationships, and how do you essentially have a successful relationship. We'll start with we'll do the co-founder bit first, and maybe we'll expand to outwards. Their relationships operate. So I have a very simple definition for a relationship. A relationship is more than one person bringing their needs together. In the case of co-founders, it's their goals or visions together and being able to accomplish it better than if they were two alone. So everybody gets more of what they want, more of what they need, gets further along their goals faster together versus alone. That's relationship.
Is a relationship always um, is it always like a partnership, right? We talked a little bit about asymmetric advantage,
Mhm.
right? Earlier, is a good relationship one where each person has an asymmetric advantage that helps the other, that like the company, let's say, needs or your family needs? Is that good, or is it like two people who overlap in more deep ways, but also
It's a very question. It's a very good question. One of the things you actually see this with like Y Combinator, they really focus on having multiple founders who have different areas of expertise for exactly that reason. They're looking for asymmetric advantages because you can compound them. So there's a benefit to having different asymmetric advantages because they can compound. There are, of course, some risks that come with that. When it comes to families, like romantic relationships, marriage, families, and stuff like that, I think it also depends on your set of goals and how you will choose to pursue them. So,
Mm.
um, for example, I've seen a lot of different kinds of relationships, and some work better than others, but also for different kinds of people that work differently. And some of those dynamics that work really well are if there are two people who are really passionate, like, power, we talk about power couples, quote unquote, frequently, if their goals diverge, it can be really challenging for them to be supportive of each other.
Mhm.
If they're working on the same thing, there's obviously some nuance to this, but if they're working on the same thing, they have a shared goal vision in their professional life, it's easier to have a little bit more alignment or a lot more alignment.
Yep.
Usually, though, and there's a lot of research on this, like it's not just what our goals are, but how we navigate those differences that tend to matter. And that actually brings us back to for the founders, uh, when founders have asymmetric advantages, being really clear on what their shared vision and goal is, where their asymmetric advantages are, what that then almost like determines what their particular lanes are, who does what, comma, and having a process in which neither of them is holding back. They're putting on the table what they have a need to put on the table to address the shared set of responsibilities, goals, even when they have different viewpoints on the same thing. That process is really critical. And one of the things that I often find is underneath co-founders that are kind of falling apart or breaking apart or splitting apart or going at each other, which often happens in subtle ways before it gets really obvious or over. Underneath that is a set of things that isn't being said that needs to be said and communicated and seen and addressed.
Yep.
And not everybody has a set of skills yet, or knows how to engage them, or they get caught up not actually creating the environment and relationship in which we can do that in the service of our shared goals and needs. And that frame really matters.
Right. So, in it, like, how are we reminding ourselves we're doing this together and we have different skill sets and stuff? I mean, so how do you handle as a founder with a co-founder who, like, even if you start with, and I'm thinking even from my own experience, right? I've had many co-founders who I think we have very different asymmetric skills, which is great. At the same time, one person's always CEO. And I think CEOs in many cases feel like they almost by definition either have to or end up learning a little bit more about the other roles. And so what happens when you have a co-founder who isn't, or at least you feel like their co-founder isn't doing their fair share, right? For whatever reason, personal issues, who knows? Like there's reasons why they're slacking a little bit, or in your
Mm,
mind they are.
mhm.
Or there's something else going on where they're not getting it done. How do you deal with that situation, especially if you don't know a lot about their work area? So once again, like give the CEOs like, hey, I don't think you're getting this done the right way. You're not doing enough. Even though I'm not the expert as CEO, but how do you, I don't know if this makes sense. Like, how do you
Yeah.
deal with a situation where a CEO is trying to be the CEO and knows a little bit, a lot about a little bit about a lot of things,
Mhm.
and it gets in the way of their co-founder who either knows more about it, or maybe the co-founder isn't doing as good a job as they should be, or for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I don't
So,
so so how do you deal with it?
one of the things that is a core role of the CEO is to set direction and pace.
Mm.
And a big part of that is setting expectations. And so if the CEO is coming into an experience, their system is telling them, their brain is telling them, usually through some mode, it's not always in this way in people's brains, but usually through some version of this doesn't feel right, or it's not moving as fast as I envision or at the pace that I'm setting. Sometimes what will happen is they'll start to question, or they'll frame it as a questioning of the whoever it is, with CTO or the COO or someone else in the org. um, they'll they'll frame it almost as a questioning rather than saying, "Hey, here's the." I don't know if I express this cleanly or clearly. Um, hey, here's a set of expectations. Here's the pace. Uh, Based on the data, the metrics, whatever it is that I'm seeing or what I'm experiencing, it seems like we're not necessarily on pace for that. Can you bring me up to speed? And what is it we need in order to accomplish that pace? If we're not able to accomplish that pace, then we're going to need to get a very clear idea of reality then. And that's a very different kind of conversation, if that makes sense.
And like that's still a hard conversation to have
Yes.
with especially
Right.
co-founder, but even teammates.
Yeah.
Or
It's also a very different conversation than, hey, I think you're slacking.
right. Yes, that's a very negative conversation.
Right.
Going to the relationship piece, like how do you build relationships that are not necessarily all transactional, right? Because you as a founder build, it all can feel very transactional. It make
Yeah.
ice.
Right. A transaction is very I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I'll do this for you, you do that for me. Very tit for tat. A non-transactional relationship is one in which I experience someone else being invested in my particular vision, goal, need,
Mm,
want. And so one of the things that almost every set of co-founders or in every org that people have is they'll have a shared vision or shared portion of the vision and goal, and then they'll have personal pieces that matter to them. And we all have that to different extents. Some people really value excellence. They value performance. They value results. Some people really value freedom. They like to have more time and space. Some people value lifestyle, and some of that is picking someone who has enough that's shared that makes sense for your shared vision, and what we what creates often an experience of a relationship more is, oh, you're invested in the things that really matter for me, in the values that matter for me, in the needs that I have, and the goals that I have, and even the pieces that are not strictly related directly to you getting what you want for this company, for our partnership in the company. That is such a key part of it, and a thing that I think, when it's not as present, creates a lot of downstream issues and uncertainty and doubt, a feeling of like, oh, this person doesn't really care about me.
yeah. No, that's very well said. Um, if a founder has like 15 minutes listening today, like has 15 minutes tomorrow morning to build a better decision making practice, what's the one thing you would tell them to do to build better decision making?
Better decision making specifically.
Decision making or just being a better entrepreneur?
Mhm. I heard this actually from a founder that I really loved. It really affected me. He said, the single most important practice that traders have that makes them much better traders, like traders in the market.
Yep.
He said they'll make a prediction, they'll write down the prediction, they'll make a call before they actually make a move. And then afterwards, whether it was right or wrong, they'll stare at it
Mm,
and pre-registering and writing down a prediction. I was like, wow. And I started immediately doing that, which has been a really wonderful exercise, because the thing that happens when you are willing to, one, register the prediction,
yep.
write it down, you actually write it down in advance. And two, you go and look at it afterwards, especially when it doesn't go the way that you thought it would. And when it does, it's also worth looking at. But certainly when it doesn't, is that it helps you upgrade and update your mental models for things.
Yep.
You stare at it until it really makes sense.
Do you have a document? Like, do you have a single document you write all these down? And then how do you know, like, you're making decisions every single day. So how do you know which decisions each day you should actually write down or each month write down
It's a good question.
enough to,
Yeah. I mean, you could decide the scope of what you would like to do. It could be big decisions. It could be small ones. You could just pick any one in a given day. I mean, the ones that weigh on your mind are probably the ones that are worth writing down. The ones that you don't have 100% full bodied confidence about, or the ones that you think are contingent on a bunch of things, and your thought process about that. I think I'm a much bigger fan of a 2-minute thing on a day that you'll do as opposed to a 20-minute thing that you're never going to do, or you'll do once and stop doing it. And so, I think it's a matter of just scoping that for yourself, and probably not something that I'll be able to say, like, hey, stick your finger, do exactly this. Right.
it's a great idea to do that. And I'm probably take that back and do it myself. Every founder that I know, an entrepreneur, is trying to level themselves up to some
Mhm.
extent. Is that something good to do? And if yes, like how do you continuously level yourself up? And what does it even mean to level yourself up as your organization is changing?
Yeah. Uh, so different organizations of different sizes require a different person.
Right? A lot of people don't get there. I mean, they don't
So
want to.
many founders can grapple with it and can get stuck. And usually, if they are not, if the company is outgrowing them, either the company will get capped, they'll keep the company capped, or they'll get themselves into quite a bit of trouble. They'll find
Mhm.
themselves drowning. And sometimes that also affects the company. On rare occasions, they may get replaced. On some occasions, if they're intelligent enough and willing to, they're got enough humility, they might actually replace themselves and put themselves in a different seat that's the right seat for them. And that again comes back to being really in tune with the reality of what you're capable of. But as far as leveling yourself up, so I think there's the stairs and there's the elevator. The stairs method is going at your own, and the elevator is getting someone that you trust to look out for your blind spots and hold mind share for you and your company and the development of what the company needs.
Is that like a coach or
So a coach can be someone who really serves that role. An advisor could be, I mean, sometimes I've seen it with friends who can do that with each other, but the chances are the more the more asymmetric advantage the person who's doing this for you has in doing that, the more you'll get out of it. And that's the
asymmetric
elevator.
advantage being like they've done it before or seen these things before?
Yeah. Asymmetric advantage, as in what they do all day and what they think about all day, is how do you level founders up? Uh,
Yep.
how do you grow into or grow as fast, maybe faster than your company,
Mhm.
or your company needs you to grow? And for that reason, if you get the right coach, they can absolutely give you almost like it's really hard to even tell you the amount of ROI. Like when there's some really cool research that when there's a good match between a coach and a founder or executive, the ROI on that's like 500 to 800%, 500 to 800%.
It's crazy. Which is why people are willing to pay so much money for it versus even though they can't metric it perfectly.
Yeah. And I would still recommend you metric it. This is one of the things I always ask of my clients, or I make it a habit to ask, which is what is it that you want and what are you currently experiencing? And how do we put numbers on that? Um, and then how do we track that? Because we do want to track that. One of the things about growth and personal development and development as a founder and in your identity and for what your business needs is that it doesn't end. And so like this is an example. I heard this and I love this about like the fitness world, which is some people, they set a goal weight and there's a huge danger in setting a goal weight, which is the moment you hit the weight, you stop. But the thing about fitness is if you want to be fit, it's not about setting a number and getting to the number. It's about recognizing this is a lifestyle. It's a way of being and a way of thinking and treating my body so that my body operates in a way that I would like it to operate. I experience it. And it's very similar for being a founder and growing a company or companies and
Mhm.
doing exits. And so there's some people who really get that. And those kinds of people, I personally really love working with them because they recognize that for every goal we are chasing, there's another and we're accomplishing, and every breakthrough that we're making and every level we're growing, even partway through that, we can already see the next one that's coming after.
Mhm.
And that's really beautiful. I think it's one of the more wonderful things. Not all coaches necessarily are the best coaches for every arc. But one of the things that I do love is, in the work that I do with my clients, is that I love seeing and being there for so many arcs. And my clients have just absolutely loved it.
Yeah, no, it's a special thing to be able to be a part of those journeys. Is there if you could install one thing in every founder's brain right now and be like, okay, I'm gonna install this in your brain to level you up, to make you a better like entrepreneur, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, your emotions and your thoughts are all data.
Mm.
And it's really worthwhile to pause and figure out what that data is. It's not always what it looks like on the surface, but it is telling you something. And it's actually really worthwhile to pause and investigate that, to be really curious about it. People who, if you, like people talk about this as like trusting your gut or knowing your gut or like, your intuition, all of that is just the way that our system is designed to help us pause and actually take a look at when chances are something needs updating or changing. And it might be our own view, or it might be something, a decision that we're choosing to make, or it might be that the external world, the markets or the environment is changing to make a change. And so the thing I would really like invite them to walk away with is it's data. You might not know how to translate it, but it's really worth sitting with. And the more you do that and the better you get at that, um, the faster you'll find yourself moving and the more you'll notice like how much you can do.
Yeah, that is. I have more questions I could ask, but that actually feels like a strong way to end. Dr. Yishai, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more, hire you as a coach, or a psychologist for them as well. How do they find you?
Yeah, best place is through my website, dryishai.com, and LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably the place you can find me easiest. Yeah, shoot me a message. I mean, I just love this. I love helping founders. I just love working with founders. And if there's a way I can be helpful, I'll do nothing more.
And I will say for everyone listening, while Dr. Yishai is not my coach, I've had the pleasure of having many conversations with him, and every single one has been a joy, including this one. So Dr. Yishai, your time is so precious. So thank you for spending some of it with myself and our audience. I appreciate you.
It's been a pleasure.
From a PhD in clinical psychology to coaching some of the sharpest founders in the game and building a body of work that translates rigorous science into real tools for the people building the future, Dr. Yishai has become one of the quiet operators behind the operators. His thesis has stayed steady the whole way. The fastest way to build a better company is to build a clearer mind. Not softer, not smaller, not less ambitious, clearer. If you enjoyed hearing from Dr. Yishai, leave us a review and tell your friends. We're trying to make the world a better place for every entrepreneur. Thanks for listening.